Hannah Murray on TRE in the afternoon.
Good afternoon. Joining us on the line now is Benjamin Wallace. He's a journalist and author whose new book, The Mysterious Mr. Nakamoto, shares his 15-year quest to unmask the secret genius behind crypto. Satoshi Nakamoto is the pseudonym for the person or people who introduced the concept of Bitcoin in 2008. Over the years, several people have claimed to or were thought to be Satoshi, but their true identity has never been verified or revealed. Welcome to the show, Benjamin.
Thanks, Hannah.
It's great to have you with us. This is a fascinating story. When did you first come across this and realize that we don't actually know who came up with Bitcoin?
I was a magazine writer, and almost accidentally, I was assigned in 2011 by Wired magazine to write its first feature article about Bitcoin, which at the time was this very fringe experimental money. And it had first been announced on an obscure email list in 2008. The software was first launched on 2009. So in 2011, it was still very new. And people had only, even within the Bitcoin community, had only just begun to realize that this guy they'd been sort of interacting with online, Satoshi Nakamoto, was not the real name of the inventor. It was just a pseudonym. And in fact, when I say guy, that's just a guess because we don't know if it was a man or a woman or a group, although Satoshi is a male name in Japanese.
Gosh, amazing. So where did you start in terms of trying to work out who this person might be?
Well, I started very naively. I thought it was just going to be a sort of typical story where you do the typical reporter thing and you call enough people and someone either knows something or they can tell you who does know the thing. And, you gradually you kind of, move closer and closer to the truth and the center of the story. And in this case, that just didn't happen. Like no one knew anything. And so at the time when my article for Wired came out in 2011, I didn't end up with an answer. I mean, the closest people had speculated at the time was that it must be someone from this small community called the cypherpunks, which had been very active in talking about how to make digital money a reality in the 1990s and early 2000s. And there were a handful of them in particular who had tried to launch their own experimental monies, or at least, sketched out the ideas for them. And so those were the initial suspects as to who Satoshi Nakamoto must be, but none of them exactly fit the profile. And so at the time I published my article, I didn't have an answer. And then, years pass and more people try to figure it out, and none of them had any better luck.
It's fascinating because over the years, it's been a very controversial subject, Bitcoin. Lots of people have invested in it. Some people have made money. Some people have said it's the best thing ever. It's going to be huge. And other people have been consistently skeptical about it. The fact that the inventor has wanted to remain anonymous makes me think that he's hiding for a reason.
Well, that's one possibility. Another possibility is that the whole idea of Bitcoin, right, is that it's controlled by the crowd, by the people, by a peer-to-peer network of computers, and not by a government, not by a bank. And so it's very much kind of on brand and in the spirit of Bitcoin for it not to have a leader, because it works without being controlled by any one person or institution. And so, that's another argument for why Satoshi Nakamoto might have wanted to remain hidden.
So how did you have enough information to put a book together? What kind of things have you found out whilst researching?
Well, so the years pass, right? And Bitcoin becomes more and more mainstream. And meanwhile, I'm sort of on the sidelines. I've moved on. I'm writing about other things. But every few years, someone comes out with a new, candidate. Newsweek magazine famously ran a cover story that, was quickly debunked, but naming some random guy as Satoshi Nakamoto. And so part of the story that began to build sort of in the back of my mind was just the story of all of these failed efforts and why couldn't anyone figure this out? And simultaneously, as Bitcoin's becoming more and more mainstream, it's even weirder because it's not just, we don't know who invented this increasingly important technology, but Satoshi Nakamoto also is known to have owned 1.1 million Bitcoins, like 5% of what will ultimately be the total Bitcoin money supply. And so and none of those coins have been touched. Like, the blockchain that Bitcoin is built on is transparent. And so you can see those coins have never been moved from their initial wallets. And so someone has had this sort of superhuman restraint to not touch what now puts them among the 20 richest people in the world. And so all of these things sort of began to accumulate. And I also thought that there were as I watched how other journalists or investigators attempted to solve this, I thought there were still some approaches that had not been taken that I could take that at a minimum would lead me to new wrong answers, if not to the correct answer.
And how many wrong answers have you come up with?
Well, I mean, or how many potential right answers, right? I mean, it's tricky because there are some people who really seem like very plausible and even likely candidates to be Satoshi. And then you find out one thing that sort of puts the fly in the ointment. And just as one example, I mean, a favorite candidate for Satoshi Nakamoto is a guy named Hal Finney, who was an American computer scientist and sort of libertarian cryptographer who was one of these guys who had come up with his own digital money before Bitcoin launched. And a lot of people over the years have thought he must be Satoshi Nakamoto. But there is one piece of evidence that sort of works against that, which is that one of the emails that Satoshi Nakamoto, under his pseudonym, sent to another programmer on the project was sent at the exact moment when Hal Finney was known and was, publicly documented to be running a half marathon in California. So, then it becomes, is it possible that he had scheduled email to be sent while he was doing that? Sure. But for every candidate, there's some kind of contradictory, bit of evidence like that.
Yeah. So are there people that you think it's most likely to be? I mean, I don't want to spoil the book, but do you feel like you're close, or you or you just want to be close?
It's somewhere in between. I mean, I think I've eliminated some people. There was one guy I became absolutely convinced was the person. And I, was patting myself on the back as a reporter that I had cracked this mystery that no one else had been able to crack. And he was an Australian sort of reclusive, antisocial kind of online edgelord who wrote under a nickname, so you couldn't connect him to his real world identity. No one knew where he lived. Some people, weren't sure of his nationality. Some people thought he wasn't even alive. But there were a bunch of things that lined up for me to the point where eventually I got on a plane to Australia and, knocked on his door unannounced.
Oh, wow.
But the thing with him, the thing that kind of was the hang up was that Satoshi Nakamoto in his communications was kind of showed a normal range of emotion. Like there was enthusiasm, he used exclamation points. He could express, empathy for other people. And this guy who I found in Australia was just completely flat and antisocial and just didn't match emotionally the profile of Satoshi Nakamoto. So I think I've eliminated some possibilities, some of the more likely possibilities, and where I've kind of ended up, which is I think Sherlock Holmes, there was a Sherlock Holmes adage that said something like, if the obvious solutions are not true, then whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. And so by eliminating a lot of possibilities, I've come to currently favor the theory that Satoshi Nakamoto must be none of the people who any of us has looked at, and is in fact someone who really probably has a very minimal internet footprint, and even potentially is, for instance, an employee of, let's say, the National Security Agency, but did this as a moonlighting project, could never be public about their involvement. And, their connection to the government means they can't touch the coins and all of that. But I do think that sort of eliminating all the obvious possibilities leaves us with someone who perhaps none of us has ever even considered.
Yeah. It could be your neighbor.
It could be your neighbor. It could be.
I mean, the fact that you've seen emails that this person has written, I mean, surely an IP address can be traced. That's surely the easiest form of tracing someone, no?
Well, they used Tor, the onion router, which is the same browser anonymizing software that is required to reach the dark web. And so their IP was concealed, or, it was bounced between servers in different places. So it was misrepresented. You had no idea what their true IP address was. That said, there was a single email very early on from Satoshi Nakamoto to another one of the programmers working on the project in its infancy, where he appeared to slip and there was an IP address revealed, and it was in the Los Angeles area.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I mean, the thing with this, I keep saying he, I know we don't know that it's a he, but they clearly don't want to be found and identified. So even if you did somehow think that you'd found the right person, they're not likely to go, oh, you got me, well done, here's a reward.
Exactly. That is true. And there's a not inconsiderable faction in the Bitcoin world that thinks it's sort of wrong to even try to figure out who Satoshi Nakamoto is, because they clearly wanted their privacy. But my feeling is that until we know who Satoshi Nakamoto is, we really can't weigh in on that question of whether, they should or should not be publicly known, because let's say it's an adversarial intelligence agency, or let's say it's someone who, again, this is one of the 20 richest people in the world. If Bitcoin, increases in value by a certain amount, they could be the richest person in the world. And we've all recently seen how much impact the richest person in the world can have on society. And so I think, you can make the argument that it's important for us to know who that is. Yeah,
definitely. And I wonder what would happen to Bitcoin and the value of Bitcoin if their identity is revealed.
I agree. I mean, for instance, Bitcoin people might say, well, not much. I mean, I think it would be initially maybe a short-term decline, especially if this person were to suddenly dump their 1.1 million Bitcoins on the market. Certainly that would cause a short-term decline. But I mean, I do think that major institutions, depending on who the person is, if they, have some kind of reputational hazard, then you could see a giant financial institution like Fidelity, which currently offers investors a way to invest in Bitcoin through exchange traded funds. You could imagine Fidelity might no longer want to offer that product if Satoshi is not, the benevolent God that some people would like him to be.
Yeah. I mean, there's plenty of other cryptocurrencies where we know who the founders are, aren't there?
Yeah, I mean, most of them we do. It's sort of the exception is Bitcoin, and there are a handful of others like that, but most of them we know who the founders are.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, it's a great subject, and well done for looking into it. If people want to get a copy of the book, The Mysterious Mr. Nakamoto, a 15-year quest to unmask the secret genius behind crypto, it's available on our website, tre.radio, and it's by Benjamin Wallace, who we've been chatting with today. Benjamin, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Hannah.